The stench of the three-headed swine ghoul left Ben and Blick sick to their stomachs. But they had to dispose of the body, and it took both of them to lift the thing. "Bleedin' hell, lad, why can't we just toss this old swine into a hole and be done with it?" Blick grunted, holding the beast by its shoulders. Ben grunted as he heaved the pig's feet off the ground. "Because we can't let the others see a ghoul that looks like this." He nodded his head at the dead ghoul's own, indicating the three obviously stitched onto the same neck. "If the others see that someone tampered with this thing, it could send them into a panic." "Oh, so you're trying to keep everyone's spirits up by hiding this thing?" Ben nodded again. "And on top of that, we have children among us, remember?" Blick rolled his eyes. "Bah! When you're a dwarf, they have you hunting wolves for your food at the age of 6. Blick's eyes widened as he realized who he'd just said that to. Non-speakers, of course. I suspected that's what you meant. I never thought dwarves were barbarians who feast on speakers." They managed to carry the dead ghoul to a collapsed portion of the fortress wall. The gap initially raised concern, but then they noticed that the wall overlooked a deep river, so there was little likelihood of anything crawling up from there. The duo tossed the pig ghoul into the coursing water below, where it vanished below the surface. "There, now that that's over with..." Blick turned back to the main building. "We should scout out the rest of the catacombs. Can't let the others settle in if there's something hiding around a corner." Ben agreed with Blick and followed him inside. Back under the fortress, the two readied their weapons and peered into the dark halls. "Bleedin' hell, I can't see a damn thing," Blick grumbled. "I thought dwarves were no strangers to the dark," Ben asked him. "Look, lad, just because we spend our lives underground doesn't mean we navigate like bats. We have lanterns and torches set up everywhere." They passed a charred bundle of wood and old straw mounted on the wall. "You think we could light this?" "Unlikely, lad. That thing seems to have been well used up. It'll never light again." Blick reaches for something on his belt. However, a fine dwarf always comes prepared. From a pouch on his belt, Blick produces a trinket resembling a necklace charm in the shape of a lantern. "What's that supposed to do?" Ben asked him. "Watch, lad." Blick clutches the trinket, raising it over his head on the chain. Once above him, the bauble glowed with a warm light that filled the halls. "What the? Since when did you have that?" Blick chuckled. "A good dwarf always carries some form of light source with him. Why didn't you bring that thing out before?" "I didn't really get the chance to before that swine attacked us." Blick leads the way through the dark halls, holding the lantern trinket high. Ben scoffed, his brow tightening. He didn't like to be kept in the dark when it came to things like this, especially not literally being left behind in the dark. "Hey, wait up!" The duo crept through the catacombs, carefully peering around every corner. Ben kept bringing his hand up to his ear, waiting for it to start itching. "Lad, why do you keep doing that? That thing with your ear?" Ben flinched from the sudden question. He recomposed himself. "It's an instinct thing I have, Blick. Whenever there's some kind of danger around, my ear starts itching and I subconsciously start toying with it." Blick raised a brow at the wolf. "Oh? Has it ever been right?" "It has yet to be wrong." Blick paused and peered at Ben again. "You mean to say that it's never made a bad call?" "Consistently. It stopped me from rushing into a town full of ghouls. It told me there was something here long before I neared the gates, and it itched again right before the pig thing showed up." Ben took a breath as he stepped beside the dwarf. "It's never been wrong, and I'd trust my life to it." "Huh!" Blick chuckled. "I'd say you have a gift then, if it's right every time. What's it saying now?" Ben laughed a little. "It doesn't tell me what I'm going to face, just if there's danger ahead of me. It's been quiet since we dealt with the pig." "We be safe here then?" "I suppose so. So, we don't have to scout the entire catacombs. We can just head up and tell the others to come on." Ben grabbed Blick's shoulder. "I wouldn't be so hasty about that. Maybe it's not going off because I'm not close enough to whatever threat is down here." "Bah! Poppycock! I say you're being too cautious." If your instincts say it's safe, instincts can't always be trusted. Blick blinked his eye at Ben again. Lad, if it's never been wrong. He turned to walk back to the entrance. Ben shuddered as the light from Blick's trinket retreated away. What if it's wrong this time? The duo made it outside and rejoined the main group waiting at the wagon. Ernest stood tall, holding his crossbow at the ready and keeping a lookout for any ghouls that may have showed up while Ben and Blick were gone. Umpty stood beside him with his sword in hand. Marge stayed at the back of the wagon, looking around with a fierce expression, the occasional low growl warning any ghouls around of her strength as a bear. Avery sat in the wagon, keeping the children close. She wasn't much of a fighter, but that worked out, since otherwise there would be no one left to look after the kids. The children themselves consisted of her 5 kids. She used to have 7, but Ben's ghoulified father ate the other 2. The only other child was Red, a quiet little girl who Ben saved in his first ghoul encounter. She hadn't said a word since he met her, but she stuck to him like a burr on a cloak. Ben stepped up beside the wagon, and Red immediately tried to climb over the side and into his arms. "Oh, Red dear, careful." Avery reached out to stop her. "It's all right, Avery." Ben stepped forward to receive the cloaked child. "She'd not been separated from me since I went foraging and found you." Red jumped into his arms, and he caught her and hugged her close. "Well, isn't that adorable?" Ernest softly crooned, looking down at the wolf with the child in his arms. He gave a little honest smile. "If she were a wolf, I'd think you were father and daughter." Ben flinched at the idea. Umpty, however, wasn't so kind. "Enough of this. Ben, did you and Blick clear out the ghoul?" Ben's ear itched. He began to wonder how Umpty knew there was only one ghoul in the fortress. "Yes, we did, and we dealt with the body, so it's safe to go in there now." As Ernest put his crossbow away and bent to grab the handle of the cart again, Avery hopped down, and they all fell in next to the wagon as it rolled forward. Ben turned to confront the royal guardsman, but stopped himself when his ear started itching again. The group walked to the front door of the fortress where Blick shoved the gate open wider to let everyone in. The wagon creaked to a halt as Ernest pulled it to the main building. "So," the tall, crooked man leaned toward Umpty, "where's the entrance to this bunker under the fortress?" Umpty scoffed. "It's inside the main building, although the lights inside probably won't burn anymore." Ben walked up to them, his lips pulled back in a sneer. "Oh, you can ask Blick about that. Evidently, he has a magical charm that can help." "Oi, lad," Blick hollered. "What's with the tone? Blick, you had a magic trinket in your pocket this entire time, and you never told us about it." "Lad, all it does is make light in the dark. Did we ever have a situation when we needed that? No? Then why would I reveal such a simple thing?" Ben stepped closer to the nonchalant dwarf. "It's more the fact that you kept something, anything, hidden from us all this time. Now, I can't help but wonder what else you're hiding." Umpty stepped up. "Yes, Blick, I always knew there was something suspicious about you." "Eh? Well, what about you, ye royal dandy guardsman?" Blick huffed, pushing forward toward Umpty. Ben stepped forward, one hand raised. "Let's not make this personal. Everyone needs to be able to trust each other if we're going to push through this together." Something about Umpty's attack on Blick didn't sit right with Ben. And to boot, his ear itched every time the man spoke. "You know, I think we should all reveal something about ourselves today. Build up a bit more trust. How about you, Umpty? What's your story?" Umpty glanced around at the group. Suddenly, everyone was looking at the royal guardsman. He adjusted his coat and stood up straight. "All right then. Well, as you all know, I was with the Royal Guard." "Yeah," Blick started. "Which raises the question, why are you so far away from the Royal Palace if you're a Royal Guard?" "Was with the Royal Guard, dwarf? Was. I got discharged after an incident that left me unable to serve." "Incident?" Ben stepped closer. Umpty silently reached for his right sleeve and pulled it up to expose his arm. Where flesh should have been, there was instead a shiny white surface that had been cracked and bandaged. The palace was attacked by rogue witches one day. A stray spell blew apart the wall I was standing on. I fell, and the magical runoff turned me into living porcelain. I shattered upon landing, and the other guards did their best to reassemble me. Ben stood in silence, baffled by what he was seeing and hearing. Everyone else looked the same, mouths agape and eyes wide as they listened to Umpty's story. As you can tell, they didn't finish since they couldn't find all of the pieces. In my delicate state, the king thought it best to discharge me, so he sent me away with honours. He pulled his sleeve back down and glanced at everyone. You can probably guess why I thought it best to hide this. Ben shuddered at the disturbing visual. Bleedin' hell, Blick groaned. And here I was calling you a prissy, delicate excuse of a man. Turns out ye shouldn't even be fightin', because you, in fact, are delicate. He raised a brow. Wait, are you delicate still? Umpty sighed. Only the parts of me that are still porcelain. Namely my arm, parts of my torso. He raised an arm to point at the bandage on his head. And the top of my head. That much? Marge hollered. Then you shouldn't be fighting at all. Umpty turned to confront the mama bear. I assure you, I can still fight. You've seen me in action. Ben didn't dare argue. He understood why someone would want to hide such a curse. As long as it didn't cause trouble for the others. He glanced up at the sky. Hey, let's continue this in the bunker. It's starting to get late. The others nodded in agreement and went inside. Blick produced his lantern trinket to light the way down to the bunker below ground. As useful as this thing is, it'd be nice to have actual lights. Umpty stepped forward once they reached the lower hall. There should be extra oil lanterns in the storeroom. This way. He led everyone through the darkness. Ben's ear itched again as he and the group followed Umpty. The man was hiding something more than an old witch's curse. The door to the storeroom lay open. The wood splintered and scattered on the stone floor. Blick followed Umpty in first. Marge and Ben followed close behind with Ernest and Avery standing just outside with the group of kids. Not a moment after Marge entered the room, she gasped in horror. Blick shined his light at the offending visual of a dead soldier lying against the wall, his body ripped apart and strewn about. What's going on in there? Ernest called. Ben rushed back to the door. Nothing. Everything's fine. We're just going to be a moment longer. He ducked back into the room to see Marge leaning on a shelf with her hand on her chest. She stepped closer to Ben. You said you cleared this place out, she whispered. Of ghouls, Marge. Ben glanced at the body. We didn't go in this room before. We had no idea there was a body. We'll take care of this once everyone clears out. You'd better. We can't let the others, especially the kids, see this. Hey, I found the lanterns, Blick called out from the end of the room. And there's a barrel of oil here to fill 'em up with. Ben and Marge glanced his way for a moment before looking back at each other. She leaned back and glared at Ben with a tight brow, tipping her chin at the corpse to remind him of his promise. Ben stepped toward Blick. Is it just the one barrel? It might not be enough. Nah, lad. Right after I said I found it, I saw at least 2 more. Blick huffed. But one of them's already open and looks half empty. He sneered over his shoulder. It'll last us a while, but we still should keep an eye out for more or get busy making some. What do you mean? Blick looked at him with an almost proud expression. When you live underground, you're expected to know how to keep your place lit up. And when you're a dwarf, you're expected to be self-sufficient. Therefore, yes. In fact, I could even make more, should I need to. You can make that stuff? Yeah, we're by a river, so I can use some fish oil to make it. Can't promise quality, though. For that, you'd have to ask my brother Wick. He's the one of us that handled the lanterns mostly. Blick's voice trailed off as he mentioned his brother. Ben leaned in. You mentioned another brother before. He spoke gently. How big is your family, Blick? The old dwarf sighed and leaned against one of the sealed barrels. There were 7 of us, me the eldest, Quee the youngest, and between us there was Flick, Glick, Snick, Plick, and Wick. He paused to look back on simpler days. We each had our specialty. I was the smith who worked on our tools. Wick made and maintained our lanterns, including these ones. He presented the lantern trinket that still lit up the room. Snick was in charge of selling our wares and keeping some of the profit for himself. Flick ran a farm, so we'd never go hungry. He trailed off as he thought back to his brothers. Ben hesitated as he reached out a hand. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause you any distress. Nah, it's all right, lad. I know you didn't mean nothing. He sniffed once through his large nose. It ain't your fault I might not see them again. Blick paused for a moment, huffed, and grabbed one of the oil lanterns from the shelf. Well, no use dwelling on it. These lanterns won't light themselves. He filled one up, then held his trinket close. After a moment of silence, a new flame danced within the larger lantern, which Blick handed to Ben. Oh, of course that thing can light other lanterns. Ben huffed. What else can it do? Cook us a gourmet meal out of 2 stale loaves of bread and half a skinned rabbit? Don't be ridiculous, lad. This is just a magical light source. What ye just saw is the extent of its ability, I promise. Ben shot Blick a side-eye as he took the lantern from him and left the room. He rejoined the others who had gathered around the splintered door and handed the lantern to Ernest. Red stepped closer to Ben and wrapped her arms around him, visibly afraid. He reached down and hoisted her up to reassure her. To his surprise, her eyes had tears welling up in them, something he hadn't seen in Red since he saved her. It might seem strange, but any display of emotion was better than before. The child was healing, but she still needed him to stay close. Ben held Red as Blick came out with 2 more lit lanterns, which he handed off to Marge and Umpty. He eyed Umpty as the guardsman took his lantern, a muted look of disdain on his face. Ben's ear itched again at the sight before Umpty turned back the way they'd come. I suggest we stay in the barracks. There might be some unbroken beds still, the guardsman said over his shoulder. Ben's ear itched more furiously as Umpty spoke. As soon as Blick came out of the storeroom and followed the group, Ben fell into step beside Ernest. They slowed down to bring up the rear as Ben eyed Umpty until he was out of view. That man knew a lot more than he was letting on. He looked up at the crooked man. Hey, Ernest, he whispered. You said you don't trust Umpty. Ernest leaned down as he stepped beside Ben. Yes? How come? Why do you not trust him? They say that the eyes are the window to the soul. Ben glanced up at the man and met his gaze. Ernest lowered his voice even more. Every time I look Sir Umpty in the eyes, I see nothing behind them.